Hi, I'm Femi Okay.
I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in The Stream. Today, allegations of sexual assault during humanitarian missions.
We look at what happens when UN peacekeepers and other aid workers abuse their powers. Humanitarian workers are often seen as selfless. Sadly, that's not always the case.
In fact, while deployed to keep the peace during civil war or rebuild after an earthquake, dozens have preyed on those who need help most. Evidence of this is featured in a new Fault Lines documentary out this month. The film investigates the legacy and impact of sex abuse by United Nations peacekeepers in Haiti. Femi traveled to Haiti to speak with a number of women who say they were raped by UN soldiers. Some even say they gave birth to their rapist babies.
But it's not just Haiti. There are reports of abuse by UN workers in several other countries. So what happens to the victims? Here in our studio to talk about this, we have Peter Gallo. He's a former investigator with the United Nations. In Geneva, Switzerland, Megan Norbert. She's the founder and executive director of Report the Abuse. In Bonn, Germany, Catherine Plumrich. She's the director of Humanitrain. That's an organization that trains civilian aid and development workers in risk management. And in New York, Èzili Dantò. She's a human rights attorney and the founder of the Haitian Lawyers Leadership Network. It's good to have you here, everybody. I want to start with the voices of victims who I met in Haiti. Their stories about their encounters with UN personnel. Have a look.
Toujours uniforme dans sous l'autre ministère. Bleu de ciel. Et puis, pas bleu de ciel foncé, non? On parle.
Même si on va bien la débrouiller, casse le connaît même.
Non, et après le film, m'a viré. Même pas qu'on langue non. Li parle. M'a kon ça l'a dit. Qu'on y a m'campé li fait m'sin, li dit m'venir.
Poser peut-être ou bien doit l'engoumer avec mon nan, soit mon nan tout yo et mon no gen zam.
Et servir avec par force. Et par un bagage moi était vrai pour que me vrai. Et servir avec par force. De faire par force. Le faire.
Èzili, you see these women, these are your country women. What do you make of their stories?
The UN is an abomination in Haiti, and the grief it's brought to the poorest of the poor, because they're not going into the wealthy areas to rape. They're raping the most helpless, defenseless people in the Western Hemisphere. So for us, I mean, I've been doing this since 1994. The UN actually has been in Haiti in many different versions. I want to thank you, Femi, actually, for doing that by Force Haiti. It's the first time that I've seen a journalist give dignity to these women and let them tell their own stories. So I want to thank you for that. You actually allowed for their children to look dignified, not like most of the media portrays us as not only the poorest in the Western Hemisphere, but sort of like subhuman. So I thank you, Femi, and Aljazeera for the Haiti by Force. It's a grief for us. It's a grief for us because Haiti has less violence than most of those nations that have come to give us peace. It's not a peacekeeping mission. It's a colonial enterprise that is acting as the former Tonton Macoutes, which during the Cold War helped the U.S. maintain its dictatorship in Haiti. That's what the UN is in Haiti. They're in places like Port Salut, which has absolutely no violence, maybe just a few policemen, but they're snatching people like Johnny John from the streets and raping them and filming it in cell phones.
Èzili,
that's what the UN is. It's not a neutral power.
All right, Èzili, you mentioned a well-documented case where a young man was snatched and abused in Haiti, and the reason we know that was because his attack was seen on video. Peter, we did say this isn't not just about the UN, it's not just about Haiti. there are other instances of abuse happening around the world.
There are. The UN, however, is almost a unique position. Because of the immunity situation, they place themselves above the law and above the legal and moral standards that apply to everyone else.
So I want to share, Peter, on that note, I want to share this comment we got from Sabrina Karim. She's an assistant professor at Cornell University, and she picks up on the theme that it's not just Haiti, as you mentioned, Femi. But the theme is here that not everyone reports. We heard those voices at the beginning of this show. Sabrina, who is a co-author of a report looking at transactional sex in Monrovia, Liberia, writes, I met a woman, a girl, whose mother engaged in sex with a Nigerian peacekeeper in Monrovia. The girl does not know her father, and he's never supported her or her mother. Recently, the girl's half-sister was sexually assaulted by another Nigerian peacekeeper and became pregnant. Neither women reported their cases to the UN. They didn't think they would be taken seriously. Now they live in a squatter settlement in Monrovia and sometimes go without food. Clearly, as she mentions, not everyone reports. What are those obstacles to reporting?
No, under-reporting is a massive, massive problem. And I think there's essentially two aspects to that. One is that the nature of the assault, the nature of the attack is deeply embarrassing, and it is very difficult for women to come forward and admit that this has happened to them. But secondly, and more importantly, those that do face a system which is basically geared up to dismissing their cases and dismissing them and does not want to know. In the first instance, you have to understand that the economic disparity is such that it's very easy to bribe people. I mean, $50 doesn't get you very far in Washington. It will get you an extreme change of life situation. That kind of money is more than most people in Haiti can actually aspire to in months or years of work. But more sinisterly than that, when the UN does receive a complaint, they will, the first thing they will do is assess it and try to dismiss it. And there are many, many cases of that happening, and women basically being told there's no evidence and there's no case to answer, and the UN basically dismissing it at that point and taking no further action.
I'm going to say this, and it's really important for this show, as you listen to this show, this first show is looking at the problem. The second show is, how do we get to a solution and solutions? The UN is listening in right now to this conversation, and then they will be in part 2 of the show. Megan, there's something that's happening here that a lot of people outside of the development world will not understand. They won't understand how little children, boys and girls, can be abused. They won't understand how women who have nothing or men who have nothing can be abused. Can you help us understand the sort of situation we're talking about and how this can happen?
Well, I think it's a case of impunity breeds impunity. And the piece that you're missing in that, what you just said, is that sexual violence is not just happening to the local population. That's an incredibly important problem. And the Fault Lines documentary did a really fantastic job of empowering the voices of those women in Haiti. But sexual violence is also happening amongst and against the humanitarian community. And that's actually what my organization addresses, the sexual violence against humanitarian workers themselves. Because I think there's an intrinsic link between the two ideas. If you can, and the current situation is that you can, with utter impunity, sexually violate your colleagues or the colleagues of other organizations, what's stopping you from doing it to the local population? There's less voice, there's less power there.
Catherine, I still don't get that clarity here in terms of what are we looking at when we're in the field? What is it that would lead someone to say, this little kid, I'm going to give them a pot of yogurt and then I'm going to abuse them while they take the yogurt? These situations happen. Catherine, help us understand why.
Essentially, it's very, very difficult to understand what would go through someone's mind as they look at a child, as you've just described. So it's very, very difficult for us to really comprehend that. But as Megan mentioned there, and it's been mentioned before, we're looking at a tremendous power disparity. We're looking at immunity and impunity. So these are often situations where there's conflict, poverty, breakdown of law and order. There's absolutely no possibility that even if caught, by some miracle, even if caught, that they would be actually brought to justice or exposed in any way.
Catherine, why do you say that? Give us an example of how that might happen.
Because essentially, perpetrators aren't acting alone. They have allies. they are protected to a degree within organisations. So there's certainly the aspect of embarrassment for the organisation, worries about funding and that sort of thing, and reputational damage. So that may, even though it's not acceptable, that may be a reason why, and I'm not justifying that, obviously, but that may be one reason why that actually happens.
You know, Catherine, it's interesting that you say that because we got someone who echoes almost exactly that. This is Linda, who says, oftentimes it's because people can, because they deliberately take advantage of an unfortunate void in a society or a country because of poverty. Another reason via Twitter, this is James, who just tweeted in, are we exploring the fact that these people have these jobs just as jobs, not because they are concerned? Megan, were these attitudes among your fellow aid workers that make these tweets ring true to you?
Yeah, I think it's like any industry. I mean, that not everybody is doing the job for the same reason, and not everybody has good reasons for doing the job. It's like any other place. The individuals that I've encountered while working as a humanitarian that have that type of perspective, you know, it's just a job, you're working for the UN so you can get money, you're there to take advantage of the local population. It's a minority, it's not the majority. I think that's also important to bear in mind. Building on what Catherine said, which was all, you know, fantastic and absolutely, you know, I give it, you know, check mark after check mark. But building on that, I would add that there is very often a lack of structures in place to receive complaints, to address incidents when they do occur, and this chaotic lack of structures, policies, procedures, all these gaps plays into the fact that incidents end up being underreported or not reported at all, because simply attacking or going at something, and it's something so sensitive and difficult in a system where you don't know how to proceed, is almost impossible.
I want to bring into this conversation an interview that I did with Jane Hall-Lute. She's a special coordinator on improving the United Nations response to sexual exploitation and abuse. And I asked her particularly about why this was happening and remains an issue at the United Nations after several decades of trying to stamp it out. This is what she told me.
Why is this unacceptable behavior going on? Well, it turns out for the women of the world, this is an ever-present danger. There's nowhere women are safe. There's no family, no church, no school, no organization, no workplace.
Ms. Lute, shouldn't at the UN, under UN responsibility, isn't that the place? If there was one place in the world?
There is no one place.
Where is the justice?
I think the better question is, how can the UN work with member states to ensure proper accountability when serious allegations of SEA are made? Your question comes across to me as who is it that has to wave their hand for this problem to be solved?
No,
and what I'm saying to you is it doesn't exist.
Peter, this is obviously a huge issue for the United Nations, and I've seen various different Secretary Generals of the UN say this is a scourge, we need to stamp it out.
Yes, but what they say and what they do are two entirely different things. And what Jane Hall-Lute will not actually address is the fundamental point that these attacks, these rapes, are a serious criminal offence. And what the UN does not want to do is to face that it is criminal, and they do not want to deal with them in a criminal manner. As far as she's concerned, the answer is more liaison, cooperation, reviewing best practices, raising awareness. It isn't. The principles on deterrence in any criminal situation is not the severity of the punishment, but the likelihood of getting caught. And that is what the UN is shying away from, because it is a criminal offence. The women who were interviewed on the program that you did were all victims of a crime that took place in Haiti. There is no immunity under the 1946 Convention on Privileges and Immunities for sexual offences. The UN has maintained the fiction that there is in order not to allow these cases to get in front of the Haitian courts.
You know, Peter, I wonder if that likelihood of getting caught, as you mentioned, is affected by perceptions that certain people from certain countries couldn't have done something like that. This is actually a comment we got via video. This is Danielle. I want you to have a listen to Danielle. She's a gender-based violence expert out of the UK, and here's what she said.
One of the people who spoke to me for my research recently had worked in Central African Republic. She told me that the African Union had responded to those reports instantly, as fast as they can, and that the delay was actually with French peacekeepers, and there was a lack of belief that French peacekeepers could do that, that people from the global north could do that, and that it relates to the way in which we've ordered the issue of violence against women and girls in humanitarian action.
And she's talking about abuse in the Central African Republic by French peacekeepers.
Absolutely. But the problem you'll find there is that it was the UN that delayed handing the information over. And not only that, that they refused to cooperate with the French investigation, not because the perpetrators were covered by immunity, but because the witness, one of the witnesses, was a UN staff member. And the UN would not even allow a UN staff member to cooperate with an investigation in which in fact they had absolutely nothing to do. This is the equivalent situation. Can you imagine someone who works for the UN goes out for a sandwich at lunchtime in New York and witnesses a crime, witnesses a mugging, and the UN prevents them from giving a statement to the New York police because I'm a UN staff member and I'm somehow magically protected, that I'm above the law. Not because a UN staff member committed the crime, but because a UN staff member was involved in the loop of reporting it. And that is a complete and utter abuse of the 1946 Convention.
Èzili?
I want to underline what Peter has said as a human rights lawyer. The UN essentially puts out this myth that the SOFA agreement, the status of force agreement that brings them to Haiti, doesn't allow for them to, for Haitian courts, and for them to do anything but to essentially, when they verify an abuse, deport and expel that perpetrator and allow for their member state to do something. This is so totally an abomination, because as Peter says, the law actually doesn't give impunity. It gives immunity to the UN for the purposes of the mission. So raping a 4-year-old child in exchange for food is not part of the mission of the UN in Haiti or anywhere else. So they don't have any immunity, just on the basis of their own agreement. So this whole conversation about the UN having immunity and not being able to do anything about the perpetrators is false. And I want, on behalf of all the Haitian women who have been raped since 2004 by the UN, to say that the UN is a colonial partisan force that is there to maintain the colonial interests of the world oligarchy. That's it. It's in Haiti, not about bringing stability and security. It's in Haiti to make sure that the people do not dissent.
Èzili, let me share this. Èzili, let me share this. Let me share this. Let me share this with you.
To the global oligarchy.
Èzili, let me share this with you. This is a recent headline. The UN plans reforms to stamp out sexual abuse by peacekeepers. Again, in part 2 of this program, we will be joined by the UN and also a big organization who looks after NGOs who are looking at this issue of sexual exploitation and abuse around the world. I am wondering if this is the move, the new policy, Èzili, that is going to change things now.
No, it isn't.
That's a joke.
Absolutely.
It's an absolute joke. The UN has been saying this since 1948, zero tolerance. And, you know, every time there's some big scandal like the one we talked about with Johnny Jean in Haiti and the Uruguayans, and how they not only, you know, kidnapped an 18-year-old and brought him into their barracks and raped him. The UN is always talking about zero tolerance. But if it really cared about Black lives, brown lives, the lives of this global South, it would actually enforce the law of its SOFA agreement, or it would enforce the Convention on the Rights of Children. It's the arbiter
So we're going to put that
to make sure that there's no child pornography, there's no child prostitution.
To the UN,
what the UN
in our follow-up program. So hold tight for a moment because I want to get some more thoughts in from our community who are also watching this program.
So this is a Facebook comment from Gabrielle speaking of some of the peacekeepers in Haiti. Gabrielle says many of those soldiers are from Brazil, a country where conservative sectors consistently refuse sexual education. Rape being used as a weapon of war is not a recent concept. He says Brazilian rape culture is going abroad. So how to fix this? Megan, we got a tweet from Human Being, that's their Twitter handle there. Full background checks, polygraph exams required for employment. How feasible do you actually think that is? And do you think that actually would change anything?
Polygraph tests. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Megan.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm just saying, no, it wouldn't, because, what we're not understanding is the reason why the UN is there. The UN is a colonial force, has been since Lumumba. Lumumba said that it's a colonial screen for the World War II powers.
Ezili, let me hear what Megan has to say as well.
The UN in Haiti is the new Tonton Macoutes, essentially. So you can do polygraph tests, you can do all of that. But what folks have to understand is that the UN has to go the way that the League of Nations did. Because we have spent 13 years
Ezili, the League of Nations is not with us anymore. I hear your critique of the UN. Hold tight for a moment because I really want to hear what Megan has to say. Megan, go ahead.
Yeah, polygraph test, that's probably taking things a step too far. Doing better recruitment, and that I think is where we start talking about the conversation on how do we begin to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual violence against humanitarian workers, is from those first steps. It's from recruitment, and it's from the pre-deployment trainings, the heat trainings, and then followed up by repeated actions and words and having proper policies in place and appropriate responding when incidents do occur. But in order for better recruitment to happen, that requires that when incidents are occurring right now, that notes are being put on files, that incidents are actually being recorded, that they're being reported in an appropriate manner. So we're jumping back and forth. We're going one step ahead, but really we have to be two steps backwards. Because unless somebody has had an incident of sexual exploitation and abuse or a complaint of sexual harassment by their colleague placed on their file, when they go to the next organization, the most thorough background check won't pick up on those pieces.
The other thing which we're confusing is there is a difference between the UN's control over military peacekeeping personnel, who are basically provided by troop contributing countries, and the UN civilian staff themselves. Now, my own analysis of the reports that we were getting found that although the numbers that were being reported were very small, they were split evenly. And whilst the UN is very fond of blaming everything on blue helmet peacekeeping troops and claiming we have no jurisdiction over them, in reality, 50% of the cases were against UN civilian staff.
Right? So would vetting then have made the difference?
Well, when you get into vetting, in a way, you're actually getting into the world of future crime and trying to spot a predisposition to commit a rape.
Maybe you're just actually checking to see who it is you're sending to very traumatic, stressful
indeed,
situations around the world.
But more importantly, if you look at the situation in the CAR, why was it that the UN accepted troops from Congo who they knew had a very poor human rights record and insisted on deploying them into the CAR? In some kind of magical expectation that all of a sudden they were going to behave themselves and not behave in the same way as they had behaved at home.
All right.
It is a complete and utter fiction.
I'm just curious, Malika, what's the kind of tone that you're getting from our online community?
Well, that this is everywhere, and it is not necessarily going to stop. Price of silence says we can't separate sexual violence locally at any level from the broader pandemic and the war on women's bodies.
I said this is a two-part program. We're going to have this part of the program where you can really hear the problems. In the second part of the program, we will be joined by the United Nations to talk about how they are tackling this very, very difficult issue. I want to share something with you as well. If you go to aljazeera.com/program/faultlines, you'll be able to see Haiti by Force currently streaming online, so you can see the situation and how it's unfolding in Haiti. Thank you very much to our guests for this part of the program. Thank you for watching. We will be back with part 2. See you soon. Thanks very much, everybody, for watching.